main business officer this evening is Dr. Tom Kirkham, somebody who I've worked with over the past many years. He's now working at Innovate UK. He's going to tell us about the race to 6G opportunities for innovation.
So you need to share.
Okay, yeah. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. Keep it pretty informal. Everyone's got different backgrounds, I think, and I don't want to get too technical. So if I start getting technical, just steer me off course and feel free to interrupt me with any questions. What I try and explain to you tonight is a little bit about how I work for a government body, an arm's length government body, and it's called Innovate UK, part of UKRI, and we fund, my organisation funds universities to do research, but also funds businesses as well to collaborate with universities and to do innovation on their own. I've been there 18 months, and I try and give an insight onto how we make decisions about how we can give that money out in the context of 6G, 5G, 6G. So ask me any questions about it, because otherwise I just go through a bunch of slides, which might be quite boring when it gets to the money side of things, unless you really got any good ideas, in which case feel free to ask and I tell you how to apply. So as Ian mentioned, I used to work with him at SDFC down at Harwell, and I worked there twice. I did my PhD part-time down there ages ago. Prior to working there, I worked at Janet, which was UKERNA back then, which is academic network. That's down at Harwell as well. But before that, I worked in North Wales with Louis. We did university partnership schemes up on Anglesey. And that was my first sort of venture into computing. I studied history, I couldn't get a job. And then I ended up going to North Wales, trying to get into computing. So here we go.
What is CITP?
Oh yeah, it's a good point, sorry. Yeah, thanks very much to the BCS for hosting this. So CITP stands for Chartered IT Professional. So I'm a member of the BCS, and because I've been a member for quite a while and I went through the chartership process, I got chartership. This is the first time I've ever used those letters, and I'm proud to use them. And I mentored two people at SDFC still. They were on the graduate training scheme in computer science towards CITP. Okay, see if this works. So I try and cover the basic telecommunications and then what sort of shaped things over the last few years, which is sort of the rise of data. Going into
the screen share isn't on.
Okay.
So, and it's coming out as very white that people are online.
Right. So how do I correct that?
You have to go use the Zoom control to share screen.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. So yeah, then we'll go into some policy stuff around diversification and how that's designed to put the UK in an area of opportunity, and then how it's going through to 60, and then some funding opportunities that we've just launched as well. So telecommunications, I always find it quite a loaded term because it always makes you think of phone boxes and stuff like that, and telephones. But in reality, it's just the transfer of data, video, voice, or whatever over wires or wireless. So it's pretty wide ranging, really, and it's quite an important sector. And that diagram, it's just a random one. But for me, this is what telecommunications means. So I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, and I remember the BT adverts with the fuzzy bird on it. And back then in the 80s, it was largely about voice. I know that mobile telecommunications were emerging, but still it was largely about voice. And then in the 90s, I was bought a mobile phone because people wanted to basically say, if you ever have an accident, you need a mobile phone. That's what people used to say to you in the 90s, which got people using mobile phones. I personally didn't want people to hassle me, but I ended up getting a mobile phone. But I got one like this with a really big thick hero, and the best thing I ever did with it was used to clean the ear out with it. Then in the early 2000s, you remember the Nokia 3310, that was sort of a game-changing phone because people could change the skins on the front of it. You could play Snake on it, which is like a little game. And it also introduced Bluetooth. So with a Bluetooth connection, you could put your computer effectively on the internet, right? A slow internet. And that's when I started working in North Wales. I worked for a animal pharmaceutical company, which had the ambition to sell to farmers over the internet. And they had a load of reps, and they wanted them to automate the ordering process. And bear in mind, there's virtually there was no broadband on Anglesey at that point. So from using these, they bought these Nokia communicators, which were quite ambitious. Again, they're running on 2G GPRS with the idea of putting orders on, and the reps used them, but I took mine to football and showed it my mates, and they basically put a load of adult videos on it. So that just shows where things potentially could go with technology. So then the next sort of technical journey that got me into mobiles were the Nokia N900, which was a Linux-based operating system. So in the early 2000s, we had proprietary operating systems largely on Nokia phone Symbian, which was very hard to sort of hack into a program and do interesting things with. And Android started to emerge, but it was like, you know, it's a Google operating system. It's sort of based on Linux, and it had lots of ability to create apps and do lots of interesting things. But Nokia, in a desperate attempt to catch up with the market, brought Migo out, which was a Linux-based operating system. Unfortunately, it never really took off properly. But on your mobile phone, I could sit on a train and open up the shell command prompt and SSH into a server and do work on it. And I think that's for me, that's the pinnacle of mobile phones, 2000 and whatever year it was. I don't think it's got any better since then. The other things that sort of shaped me as well is did a CCNA course in North Wales over 2 years, painful, Cisco routing and all that stuff. And then I discovered OpenWRT, which is an open source operating system you can put onto routers, and it can make you, it can enable you to do all different kinds of things with routing software. And you can put it onto like a Linksys router. You can buy a Linksys router and wipe it and put OpenWRT on it. You could buy a Raspberry Pi and put OpenWRT on it. And what we started doing that with projects is we started making the Raspberry Pis into devices where they could listen to people's mobile phones, not in an obtrusive way, but people's mobile phones Wi-Fi broadcasts. So we could identify their MAC addresses. You could then potentially offer them free Wi-Fi through another router, which will get their MAC address, and you will get them free Wi-Fi if they give them your Facebook ID. So then you'll sooner be able to associate their social profile with their MAC address all the way through to their potential mobile device and do some really privacy intrusive stuff. But the idea behind that project, because it was a research project, was to teach people about privacy. And the only place that I could get to install it was a friend on the town council in Shirebrook, and he let me install it in the roof of the men's toilets in the middle of the marketplace. So I used to get people on the burger van and see what their attitude to privacy was. So before we move on to the rise of data, it's worth noting that the internet and the sort of World Wide Web was happening at the same time as data on mobile devices, but and it's a RAL-centric view. And at Harwell, there was obviously a key node to the backbone for the sort of move to standardised networking within the UK through the Joint Academic Network, which set a lot of the ground for what became the internet. And obviously CERN developed the concept, well, Tim Berners-Lee created the concept of the World Wide Web, and Harwell followed quickly after that, being a partner with CERN. And this is a W3C event rather in the 90s. So, and Harwell used to be the home for the W3C hub for a number of years. So as soon as the data transmissions were being sorted, standards soon followed, and the standardization is really important to make a note of at this point. So with respect to mobile devices, you see the trajectory of data is a bit later on. So the internet probably start that in the early 90s and go up. Mobile devices really around the end of 3G onto 4G, that's when people really started to consume data. And people ask, what's the point in 5G? You know, what's the use in 5G? What's the killer app for 5G? Quite commonly. And it's a different mindset because 4 or 5 years ago, it was all about apps. People use mobile phone networks and the latest iterations of them to derive new apps. 5G came along, people didn't necessarily associate that with new apps or functionality, but the whole bandwidth has increased and the speed. And people are doing more and more things on their phones that they wouldn't normally do. So there's people watching loads more videos. My son spends all his time on TikTok, even when I'm, you know, if he's on the toilet and things like that, constantly on TikTok, which is fine, but I'm glad I'm not his age because I'd probably be exactly the same. And I don't know what would be going off in my head. So try and limit his screen time, it's impossible. Yeah, anyway, that's an insight into my life. But 5G is going in that direction, and that's where the trajectory is going. And that's reflected in the, obviously, in the design of mobile phones. So as you can see, voice-orientated mobile devices all the way through to the sort of early days of the iPhone, going through what they are now, where it's a kind of more of a sort of a high-end kind of a thing of a phone is. So, you know, I was happy. I'm probably happy about here, where you can go on and, you know, get your emails and a bit of web on it. But you know, a lot of people want to get up here as well, where they've got the high quality video and all the high-end stuff, and obviously the price is quite expensive. So going back to standards, as mentioned with the W3C and the early days of the internet, the whole concept of these Gs is underpinned by standards, and it's quite interesting when you look at it. And 1G, there was actually a 1G. Never, you know, people don't really, no one goes back that far really. People commonly get on board at 3G and then go upwards. But there's very intricate standards for all these different generations of mobile device or mobile telecommunications technologies. You can download them to worldwide standards and people build equipment to them. That's why you get devices that work cross-continent and people can develop a new phone and it work across the world. But there was a time when these standards weren't as integrated as what they are now. So for instance, back in the 2G days, you would get a mobile phone and you might not be able to take it to America unless you got a specific kind of a protocol on it. And that was a big issue. And potentially that could come back going towards 6G. If there's a split, a political split within the standards bodies, it could be the case that Asia go one way and the West go another way on some things. And that is a genuine concern. So there's always politics at play, but generally the standards try and create a framework for what's viewed as the next functionality within the mobile phone networks and what people want and what people are going to use. So I mentioned the standards bodies. Europe, in the early days, in the 1 to 5G, we've been quite dominant through a body called ETSI. The UK have got you know, key people on ETSI, and we've helped shape the way mobile devices have been used across those generations. But increasingly, more and more vendors are coming from China and the East, and they're shaping a lot of the standards because they're putting them in their devices as well. And it's a crucial thing, standards are, because if you get your standard adopted by 3GPP, effectively it's a global standard straight away. And if you've got a device that's got that standard, you can put it to market first and say, this is the first mobile phone device that does X, which is a big thing when people are wanting to buy the latest stuff. So standards have got a very functional use, but also quite commercially sought after as well. And from an industrial point of view, the UK, we're always trying to do deals now, not only with European partners around standards, but we're trying to make friends with people in Asia, such as Japan, to get common understandings around cybersecurity, so all those can be adopted within global standards. Now, just rolling back a little bit from standards, as we've developed, and I mentioned just previously that there has been an emergence of technology coming from Asia now, and it's not just within telecoms. You know, there are lots of technology now made in China, South Korea with Samsung, and the UK, it's quite easy to see this sort of decline of British industry in some respects. I mean, we got the privatisation of BT, and it's not directly linked to that, but effectively in the early 2000s, when BT procured its next generation of hardware for its broadband and infrastructure, it went on price. And instead of going with Marconi, which was probably the last big British firm, it went with Huawei, a big Chinese incomer, who did it a lot cheaper. And that effectively Marconi ended up collapsing and splintering off into 1,000 different pieces. And the country lost a major player within that industry. And as a result, going back to standards, we lost some influence on those standards bodies. So we declined a bit. That's not a case for sort of nationalisation and state control, but it's a sign of globalisation within the technology, I would say. That we have to sort of adapt to as a country, and that's consolidation has led to well, this is a 2018 market share. So the next slide will explain what's happened since then, but within the UK, this is more or less the picture. So if you look at a mobile phone telecom mast, it's probably made by Nokia or Ericsson in the UK. Used to also be made by Huawei, but there's been a law that's came out which is basically removing them from the core network over the last few years, which is an issue because there's no real supply chain diversification. So how are we going to create our new companies that are going to enter this market when core infrastructure is dominated by European companies, but they're not really got much of a UK base. Although Ericsson is setting something up in the UK, Nokia's got some presence as well. So that's where the first bit of policy comes in that I'm going to mention tonight, which is the 5G supply chain diversification strategy. That was £250 million from government to try and loosen up the sort of set of providers in the UK providing services to the core network. And a key area around that was Open RAN, which again is about open standards, and it's basically an open source implementation of the radio area network, which forms the basis of the towers and all the infrastructure you see for mobile networks. What happened with that £250 million was the first tranche of money was put on UK 5G test beds and trials. So Tony was talking about Oxford Smart Cities earlier on. So there's lots of smart city projects funded across the UK with this money. And it happened during the pandemic. So a lot of these projects finished and then the equipment was delivered because of the delays in the supply chains. And also a lot of the meetings and the projects had to be delivered remotely. But there was a lot of ambition. There's lots of different use cases from manufacturing to health and social care. And quite a lot of these projects have left a legacy that is being built on in different areas to try and sort of create regional identity in clusters. So Scotland's got a 5G set of clusters around Scotland 5G. And there's different manufacturing sites which are still got 5G networks and test beds people can use. So going back to Open RAN, the supply chain diversification was designed not only to create those test beds, but also to implement Open RAN across those test beds. So as we mentioned previously, Nokia and Ericsson could do this stack on their own. But the goal is for a radio vendor to say be Nokia, compute vendor could be somebody else, it could be Microsoft, cloud vendor could be Amazon, and the integration vendor could be a software company in the UK that specialises in knitting things together. We've got no interest in telecoms, but they're good at working with standards like Open RAN and other standards like that. So you can see where the UK can start getting chunks of this market that we're currently sort of lacking in supply chain. That with the lack of supply chain diversification, we can start getting it back by pushing ORAN. And ORAN is all about softwareization is a large part of that. But if you look across the 5G release stack, and 5G is not like a static generation, there's iterations of that over the years. So we're currently going into release 18 plus, where we're defining things like non-terrestrial networks. So we're increasing, so satellite to mobile is becoming a thing currently. as is neutral host networks, millimeter wave, which is the sort of small cell things that you can put on lampposts for 5G. All these technologies are being pushed forward now, and standards are being pushed out for them. And that's pushing into new areas such as IoT, VR, and industrial IoT, etc. Now that diagram's for Qualcomm. So the opportunity for the UK is looking at what applications will use advanced 5G going into 6G. And if you look at them, they're going to be either requiring really good latency, which basically is the response time from the network, such as haptics. So haptics is where you would, brush somebody's teeth from the other side of the world with a robot or something like that. But there's more practical use cases, obviously, maybe in manufacturing and training and things like that. But also the whole metaverse concept as well. That might not necessarily need as much latency, but it definitely needs more bandwidth than what currently is on offer. And like they're the kind of, you can see that space as being a new area that's going to be enabled by the development of these next generations of 5G going into 6G. And that's an opportunity for the UK because one of our strongest sectors is our creative industries sector. And it's one of our main exports. So currently 12% of our main industry exports is from creative, and there's lots of software, games, film and TV, music and arts. All that area really requires good bandwidth, good speed, good connectivity, which could be enabled by advanced 5G going into 6G. And that's where we then move on to the race for 6G. And that's where we go into this policy. So this wireless infrastructure strategy was released in April, and it's the UK's government sort of drawing the line and saying, right, we're now going to target 6G and we're going to put some money on that. And that's where we are now. Germany have put around 300 million into 6G, the Netherlands around 200 million, Finland are putting a similar amount in, France, Spain have all got advanced 6G strategies. They all recognise that in order for them to get into the standards bodies early and to identify the business making opportunities around 6G, they need to invest in use cases and applications and hardware around 6G. And the wireless infrastructure strategy follows a similar course. Yet the money's a bit smaller. So the reality is 70 million at the moment. So as mentioned, advanced 5G going into 6G is all about high data rates and high capacity. It's also about great coverage, better security. Basically, your ideal wish list, I think, probably gets passed on to each generation of mobile technologies, but these are going to have to be tangible. And there's, real goals to create the, more ubiquitous connectivity. And you can break this down between sort of consumer-facing applications, business-facing application, industry, and also government as well. And the timeline for 6G is roughly identified as 2030. So the last standards of 5G will be going out by the late 2020s, and we'll start seeing the 6G standards coming in 2030. Right, a bit technical. So if you look at the opportunities within this from a sort of infrastructure and a service provision point of view, it's got a lot of stuff going on in this diagram, but it's got the usual things that we talked about, such as Open RAN, neutral hosts, better coverage, edge computing, smart cities, digital twins, metaverse, networks and networks. Lots of different terms, but effectively, more, I guess you can see it within the context of converging technologies. So you've got AI and also the future networks, plus other uses of technology such as softwareization, cloud virtualization, all coming together to create new solutions that sort of link all these technologies together, whether it be in a factory where they're using AI and low latency technology to quality check goods as they go through a production line, all the way through to, say, creative industries, where they're using them to do sort of automated video editing across different geographical locations. So, you know, that opportunity and the potential strength in the UK has led to the government to identify telecoms as one of these 5 strategic priorities for the UK. So there's 5, the 5 include quantum, which you're probably quite familiar with. There's a lot in the news about quantum all the time. Engineering, biology, again, it's quite a well-known about area. AI, well-known, very little understood in some respects. It can be defined in many different ways. And semiconductors and telecoms. So semiconductors are very closely linked to telecoms. So the whole sort of development of chips and silicon in relation to mobile phones depends on advanced semiconductor technology. And obviously a lot of that's located in Taiwan. And there's and the US looking to onshore quite a lot of that, not only due to sort of issues around global geopolitics and sort of the South China Sea and all that, but also the desire to create that kind of expertise again in the US. But the semiconductor supply chain requires elements such as lithography, where they can print circuit boards down to the sort of really tiny nanometers. And it's not cheap, and it's very complicated to assemble these kinds of supply chains. And that's one of the areas where the US have sort of been in a battle with China, trying to restrict some of those technologies so they can't necessarily develop the telecoms of the future, such as going back to Huawei. So they banned Huawei from the Android operating system, and they banned them from some of the future semiconductor technologies. But Huawei have just announced a new phone, a Mate 60 Pro or something. That's a 7 nanometer board with almost as advanced as what we're producing through the other companies such as Samsung at the moment. So it's an interesting sort of interplay going off around that industry, which is being reflected in sort of the telecoms market. So from a UK perspective, do a strength and weakness analysis. This is quite basic really, but the global market's predicted to grow from 1 trillion to 2.4 trillion by 2030. The UK wants to get a good share of that. But if you look at where we've sort of declined and where we've maintained some strength, our sort of main strengths are within our academic community. So we're still producing lots of high quality research within mobile communications, lots of PhD researchers, master's researchers. The trouble is a lot of them are going to work for companies like Samsung, you know, non-British owned companies. But we've still got leading telecom operators such as Vodafone. We've got global interests, BT, not only doing telecommunications, but also non-terrestrials, whether any more into space and Inmarsat. And we've got quite a good set of laboratories and ecosystems, and our finance and regulation as well still advanced. So, as mentioned, we've got opportunities to try and build those open networks and push into 5G and 6G around applications and leverage the UK space industry. But we do sort of lack, since Mark Owen's gone, a good manufacturer. And not wanting to be too political, but we've not had a real long-term strategy in terms of financing for these things for a number of years, due to a lot of political change that's been going off. So that's the infrastructure side of things. From an applications point of view, it's pretty similar. So we've got quite a wide range of applications and quite a creative open society that develops them, and again, good investment opportunities and good test beds. But a real strength is our software industry. So we've got a good background in the gaming industry and lots of business related software and e-commerce, which is all right to cross over into sort of the 5G and future telecom space. And a good area of smart manufacturing, and also the wider digital economy across Europe. We've also got our NHS and large scale public services, which potentially we could leverage. And obviously the other weakness is our lack of manufacturing to some extent, although the car industry is an area where 6G is going to be quite important, particularly if we go through to automated vehicles and integrated traffic management systems. Right, so this is where the funding comes in. So being part of government, we're part of the telecoms wireless infrastructure strategy. We've got £30 million or £70 million to spend. And the sort of main themes are the networks, which includes cloud-based integration, but also non-terrestrial, next generation wireless using AI and signal innovation and RF innovation, terabit optical, which is lasers, fiber optics, improving that, and software-defined networks, which I think I mentioned there, but it should be over there. With the whole goal to improve commercialization rates. So a big chunk of that money has gone to EPSRC, which is part of UKRI, which fund the universities. So there's 3 hubs that have basis for distributing this funding. And the wired and wireless spectrum one's located at Oxford through Dominic O'Brien. That's linked to Bristol, who do a lot of work around O-RAN integration. Oxford's also a centre for quantum as well, so there's a quantum comms overlap. Cloud and distributed computing are being led by Imperial and Leeds, and the network of networks is being led by a fellow, Harold Hass in Strathclyde, who's invented Li-Fi. Has anybody heard Li-Fi before? Yeah. So Li-Fi is when you basically, Harold's got a technology where you can basically put it in a light bulb and it sends data. So you put your laptop under the light and it gets its internet connection through the light rather than through the wireless network. And that's got applications. In the military, they're quite keen on it because the only way people can nick the data is by literally standing underneath the light. And there's other use cases potentially as well, say in car factories and things like that. But it's not, Arrow's not going to just do Li-Fi with that money. There's also lots of other advanced fiber things like that can go off. But from Innovate UK, we launched this competition on Friday, and we had our briefing event at lunchtime today, which is a £22 million competition for companies to get involved in future telecoms. I mean, this is funded at 100%. So if you've got any ideas, you can apply for this competition. It's the rough budget is 500k up to £7 million size projects over 13 months. We anticipate to fund probably around 20 or 30 projects. Anybody can lead: academia, universities, public sector, private companies. The whole goal has got to be sort of business driven, good route to market, R&D focused. If you want any more information, I'm happy to share that. And then to support all that as well, we're putting money into this program called iCure, which funds university researchers to create spin-out companies. It's initially a training program around commercialization of the idea and market research to develop your idea. And then that can be followed by an extra grant to enable your spin-out company to really do some prototyping. And it's got a great track record, lots of jobs created and return of investment for the UK. Also, to try and stimulate new business in this area, Innovative created a new scheme called Fast Start. And this is where this is where anybody in the room can get involved, because all you need to do is set up a company, have an innovative idea, and bid for this. And you should stand a reasonable chance of getting it if you can put a good enough case forward. And what's the best thing about this is that it's funded at 100% and you get 70% of the money up front. It's limited to 50k, but it's still a good bit of money for people with good ideas, new companies to put that first foot in the water. And what happens is when you get this funding, you become part of obviously the cohort of projects on the Fast Start, but you get Innovate UK support to network with other companies. And potentially the goal is then to try and get these novel ideas into wider supply chains, so then you obviously can scale up. That's the big boss of Innovate UK saying that I like it. It was an idea that came to fruition under his leadership. Can't really comment on that. Innovate UK, A4I is another great scheme that we do. We're putting less money into this, but there's already a load of money in this already. And this partners companies with national labs to solve problems. So SDFC are part of it down at Harwell, but also NPL at Teddington are part of it. And there's 3 to 6 month projects where if you've got an existing company that's got a problem or an idea, but you need to use a large scale facility, or you talk to a professor or somebody who knows a lot about it, this pays for their time and pays for a bit of your time to develop the project or the prototype to solve the problem. And then finally, we've got 3.7 million left over that we're trying to put out in a kind of a ERDF, European Regional Development Fund way, where we give the universities the money. People can go to the universities and get support for free, which is what happens already in the Scotland 5G approach. That's still being finalised. So, in summary, advancements in telecommunications do shape society, and new opportunities are being presented as technology evolves, but also things die off as well. And the 6G offers us an opportunity to gain lost ground, and that's the new Huawei phone. Rakuten rolled out Open RAN across the whole of Japan. They were brought in as a new network provider to challenge the existing networks, and they were going to roll out, existing sort of standards or vendor-based technology, but they changed halfway through and went software-based, and they created this program called Rakuten Symphony, which is all based on ORAN, where you can develop apps and things like that to run on mobile phone networks. So effectively, the opening up of the mobile phone infrastructure enables people to start putting services on there as well, who are not necessarily providers or knowledgeable about it. And AWS are trying to get more and more into the mobile phone networking space. So at some point in time, Amazon could start doing your mobile phone service as well, which is obviously another threat to the EU sort of prominence in this area, but also an opportunity as well. So that's the end of my slides. The government also funded the UK Telecommunications Innovation Network, UK-TIN, which is a good website to visit for funding opportunities and more information on telecoms. I hope the slides were interesting. If you've got any questions about those funding ideas, that'd be crap, and that you've got a better idea where we could put the money, please suggest. If you want to know how you can get your hands on the money, I'm happy to have a chat and give you support about how you can commercialise any ideas. And if you've got any other questions about how 6G or 5G are developing, please ask. And thanks very much for listening.
That's great, Tom. Next up. Are you ready to take questions from the audience here?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do that first. Then we'll see if we've got any questions in the Zoom Q&A, and we'll see how many questions we have.
Yeah.
So over to the audience for any questions.
Yeah, one of the things that 6G seems to be ideal for is autonomous vehicles and how you use autonomous vehicles in the wider space. Do you see that as one of the key applications of 6G, or how does that rate with other applications of that sort?
Yeah, I think it's a good way of summarising the direction of travel with 6G, because not only have you got that happening within the automotive industry with the drive to electric cars and smart cities as well, but it relies on a lot of safety and mission critical applications, the whole sort of autonomous vehicles and the smart infrastructure on the roads. I think in 5G Advanced there's already some standards coming forward on that, but yeah, I think it'll be a core part of 6G. Whether how it happens, I know Oxford had looked at supporting some projects in that area, or Oxfordshire County Council have done some work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just can't. It's definitely needed. Look at all the traffic and stuff like that. If everything could be managed better, it'd be a lot better. So we sort of dream of those things happening, and yeah, maybe when we're all nearly dead, it might become a reality towards the later end of 6G.
So will it need, and also 6G, will 6G need a whole load of new towers to replace all the 5G towers that are out there?
It depends what kind of radio frequency signaling that's being put onto it. I mean, if it's just a software upgrade in terms of how the data's processed,
Yeah.
it could be just used on existing infrastructure. A lot of the 5G where I live, well, it's 4G plus because it's effectively some of the 5G features, but we're on a 4G mast. So you don't necessarily get the larger amounts of connectivity and the bandwidth that you would do on a 5G mast.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yep.
So, does this make fibre broadband for domestic use redundant if you get to 6G? Why would you need to have both, have both and be paying for both?
I think fibre is obviously going to be more reliable and less prone to sort of frequency interruptions, and you get it through walls better. But in poorer areas, so there's a 5G out of test beds and trials. There was 5G project in Liverpool, and they installed it in Kensington, which is one of the sort of less well-off areas. And they worked with the local schools to give tablets to the kids, and because it happened during the pandemic, it had an added sort of benefit because they used the small cell network with 5G, so it could penetrate into people's houses. So those people didn't need to have the internet at home; they could go through 5G, and they created a kind of a private network as well into some of the schools' resources. So you can see it. Well, 5G is already replacing the need for broadband in some communities. But yeah, I think there'll always be a need for fibre if you can get it. I mean, we can't even get fibre where I live. Can't get 5G where I live either. It's probably the same in Oxfordshire, Royal Oxfordshire. Sort of
I think that we're doubling up on infrastructure investment if we're going for full fibre to the home at the same time as we're potentially investing in as a nation, investing in 5G and then 6G. Why should we be?
I think if you live in a nice area of London where you've got fibre to the home and you've got really good 5G, potentially that's doubling up. But I think in a lot of places it's one's going to follow the other in quite a lot of years. And some areas might not get fibre, some areas never will get a decent signal. And there's also within 6G the whole idea of these low Earth orbit satellites, what Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX and OneWeb. Potentially they could come in and take a big chunk of mobile data connectivity as well. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty around what the infrastructure of the future is going to look like. But I think the government has to take a position on investing in these things so we can create new companies or support existing companies who provide hardware and services to that global market. Yep.
One create our own network.
You what?
One create our own network that's English rather than relying on something called Samsung or Hawaii.
Well, we were in the early 2000s using Marconi, which is British, but the decision, I believe, was largely based on cost back then. There's lots of, when we do our grants, everything has to be complied with subsidy control, world trade rules and the Brexit agreement rules and things like that. Gone are the days where we can say we're going to just buy British for all our infrastructure, because then it tilts our relationships with other countries that we've got trade agreements with. I think there was a case which was it related to Airbus or something like that, and subsidies towards Airbus, and the US fined the government some money. So all this global subsidy stuff going in the background plays a big part in it. But Samsung funded largely through government funds to set it up, and Huawei, the questions over where it gets its money from. But that's a sort of global political thing. But we are, with it moving to more open technology and less sort of vendor specific, there is opportunities for British innovators to get in the market in there. Any other questions?
This is kind of related on today in the radio I was hearing that somebody's going to build this solar farm in space, so you can charge up your mobile via that solar farm. I don't know if you've heard about it or not.
It's space solar, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, space solar.
Yeah, so there's ideas that microwaves or some kind of wave that they harvest, well, they get the energy from the sun up in space, but it's a lot stronger, and then they beam it down and then distribute it.
Do you think that's good for better for the environment than you?
Potentially, yeah. It's very much early stage, very low sort of TRL. Yeah, there's a UK interest in that. I think there's a UK space solar company that's working with Saudi Arabia to look at opportunities around that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, that, because there's so much about lack of fuel, and we can make that bigger as a solar farm. That might be better for us, but this is kind of to charge up your mobile phones, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, space is getting a lot cheaper now, isn't it? And people are putting all kinds of different things into space and different orbits. So there's loads of different opportunities there, particularly around communications and energy.
It's very good.
Yeah. You've got a question?
Yes. I want to know could you explain more about the fundamental technologies related to 6G compared to 5G? The main difference would be the computing power and the speed and the transportation speed of the signals. If they are, then the semiconductors would be the key points. And also, if it relates to computing power, then quantum computing, which at Oxford is very progressive, would be an advantage. And if related to transportation of messages, then it would be the transportation cables. So what are those fundamental technologies related? That's one question. And two is, compared to the Starlink by Elon Musk, what would be the most difference between 6G and Starlink's that's wireless?
Okay, so the first one, I think the fundamental technologies of 6G are being defined, but you identified the sort of core components. So we need better semiconducting, and Moore's law. If everything still goes by Moore's law, the power of semiconductors is going to increase, which is going to increase computing power, particularly at the edge of networks. So the old concept of moving compute away from sort of server farms to more sort of localized devices, where potentially you can do a lot more computational processing, say on battery powered devices such as your phone or your car. That could be one area. Energy efficiency, as mentioned, there's standards being developed around how that can be improved. A lot of, if you look at mobile phone masts now, at the bottom, there's more or less a data center because of the amount of data that goes through them and has to be processed. So there'll be lots of work around the architectures of that because of the increased data that will be coming from 6G. So it's a sort of on the same trajectory as 5G in terms of better latency, increased speed, better reliability, improved coverage. So yeah, that'll be the sort of characteristics, and then it's up to people who are inventing the new applications that can use it, which can influence the standards, such as around automated vehicles, manufacturing, and things like that. With respect to Starlink, that's coming out from a different angle. That's a private implementation of a networking technology, and it could potentially be a challenger to what's happening currently within mobile networks. And you never know, arguably, well, not arguably, if you've got a satellite in space, it's going to have a better coverage than what a mast on the ground is going to have. Unless it's not limited by the landscape and the topography, it can go straight down. And there's efforts to, OneWeb looking to get into that space as well, and probably other players entering that area and things are getting a lot cheaper as well. So non-terrestrial communications are going to be a significant factor of 6G. Whether some of them are part of the standard or not, it remains to be seen. And that could lead to one of these proliferations of standards like we talked about in 2G, where maybe you've got a sort of 6G standardized based non-terrestrial network you can use on your mobile. Then if you want to use Elon Musk's, you have to get another device. Could be an issue.
Yeah, you mentioned the funding for developing prototype applications, demonstrating them. How much of the technology would be ready in that sort of time frame, or would you be able to simulate these applications?
For 50K, you're talking about the sort of fast start ones.
Yeah.
So for 50K, feasibility study, feasibility report, small scale based testing.
So that would rely on having access to, would the applicants be expected to buy that sort of technology, or would they be able to borrow?
You can do a lot of simulations software based.
Yeah.
And you know, the Raspberry Pis and the OpenWRT and things like that are quite, you know, obviously quite cheap to get hold of. And I think you can put equipment charges to some of the budget. There's also a lot of test beds in the UK now where you can link into Open RAN and 5G testing facilities.
Also, you mentioned Li-Fi, and did I read sort of transmitting through water as a possible application?
What, for Li-Fi?
No, not for Li-Fi, for some other carrier.
I'm not sure. I've not seen that one.
No, okay, perhaps.
But yeah. I was too fascinated with Li-Fi.
Are there any Li-Fi devices?
Yeah, the US military use them, I think. Although I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. It's not. It is being recorded, isn't it?
You can say that. You can't. You can't show us.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah, it's done a TED talk. Harold Hass has. If you have a look on that, he does the whole Wi-Fi thing. It's quite fascinating, but it's a novelty in the sense of the wider sort of optical field, because there's lots of other applications of optical networks, but also beamforming as well. So there's a thing called smart surfaces where people have designed effectively just boards, but you can put these boards in the landscape and they can send a mobile phone signal around a corner. So if you've got an area of poor connectivity, you could, instead of getting a new antenna, you could put a series of smart surfaces in the area which can reflect the beams around, which is quite interesting. And they're low power as well. So I guess smart cities, they were a very popular term about 10 years ago, and they're still popular now. But I think my initial encounter with smart cities, and Ian's as well, when I was at SDFC, was largely around the IoT, internet everywhere, internet of things, that kind of approach. The sort of in the advancement of 5G and the development of more driverless cars and connectivity between transport, sort of bringing on a more of an enhanced vision for the smart city around wider infrastructure. Tony's got some good stories about smart cities. I'm sure he can talk to you because he's doing in Oxford.
I think the main thing, the limit on the deployment of a smart city, or all the different technologies that might be possible, the limiting factor is always the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure. So you need good fiber broadband throughout the city, and then a number of different hotspots and all the different devices. So, and in Oxford, it's been pretty bad in terms of the deployment of mobile networks. So 5G is only really just starting to, get coverage, proper coverage across the city. And, fiber broadband is pretty minimal in the city itself, and even worse out in the countryside. So you need, once you've got that infrastructure in place, then you can start to put some interesting technology applications using it.
Any more questions?
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
If you want any more information, just get in touch with Ian or myself. My email's on there, actually.
Do we have any questions
Excellent.
from the Zoom?
No, there's no question.
Oh, in which case, I'd like to allow Genius to talk about the November the 8th event, Women in IT.
That's great, thank you. So